All right, welcome in to hole watch number 3, and now we are heading over to the Jonesboro Open in Jonesboro, Arkansas. Stop number 3 on the Disc Golf Pro Tour, and we are going to the Disc Side of Heaven. That is the name of this course complex there in Jonesboro, and let's focus in on one hole here for hole watch. So the hole I want to take a look at is hole number 14. Now, it is unusual that we would take a par 3 hole to say that this is going to be a hole that's going to make a difference, or that's a really interesting or unique hole here at this course. But the reason I want to take a look at this hole is because it is a classic example of tempting the player to do something. So, hole 14 is a downhill 520-foot hole, par 3. So it is, as it lies as a 520-foot hole, that's right at the edge of any sort of a really, truly gettable birdie hole for the open players. However, it is about 20 feet or so downhill, massively downhill. And so these guys can just rip and get it there. Here's why this hole becomes so interesting. So there is an out-of-bounds area that goes from about 320 feet to about 380 feet indicated here. Why is this out-of-bounds area so interesting? So what it makes the player do, it's just out of range for enough players that if they want to really go for it, they've got to rip. And the problem with this hole and this course is that the winds can get going sometimes. So if you are ripping down a hill with any sort of wind, you have a lot of opportunities for bad things to happen. So what it tempts the players to go for something that they're probably not going to get, when instead they should probably just play safe. However, what I love about the distance of this OB is that if they don't really make the choice of I'm trying to lay up at a certain spot, if they're just going to kind of rip it and see what happens, that's where bad things can happen. They can get turned over down into the OB. And then also what makes this hole difficult is the tree line that is coming in on both sides. So if you go for the basket and you aren't center cut, even if you're 50 feet short, you can end up in some pretty thick shul where you will definitely have no chance at the birdie, and you may have a difficult up and down for the par. So let's go and take a look at last year's coverage and pick out some of the drives that I think are great examples of how to play this hole, and then also the dangers that come with going for this protected pin. All right, let's take a look. Here we go at what I think is the most perfect drive on this hole. This is Lewis Bitney, Corey Morrow with a beard, as some may know him, and what he does is just throw an overstable disc with a little bit of ante on it. It flexes out fine, and he's going to land right at Circle 2's edge, right in the middle of the opening. This is perfect. Now, he's playing this hole for a 3. Why do I say that that is the perfect shot? So, let's take a look at some of the numbers for this hole. Looking at all 4 rounds combined last year, 210 players whose statistics were kept by UDisc. As they come through this hole, the hole played at a 3.33 average. Okay, so for every 3 players that come through, that looks like 2 pars and 1 bogey for every 3 players. Okay, there was only 13 total birdies all rounds last year. If you go for this hole, chances are you're going to get in trouble. Matter of fact, there's a 20% better chance of you bogeying this hole than birdieing it. About 6.5% of the time it was birdied, and about 28% of the time it was bogeyed. So this is a hole that, except for maybe the top 5 or 10 guys, this is just something you shouldn't go for, because all you're doing is putting yourself in a situation to give away a stroke. Now, as everybody plays through this hole, you've got your chance for the birdie, you've got your chance for the bogey. There's also only 20% of the people are landing inside of Circle 2. Only 20%. So if you're looking at, is this a good idea to go for this hole? Chances are, probably not. But there are people who can get it. So let's take a look at one of those. This is Simon. Now, this was a headwind on this day, and you can see that Simon turns this disc over and it rides fantastically, and then hyzers back at the end. Simon says he pretty much gave this a full rip, even though the hole doesn't really need it for his sort of power. But because of the headwind that he had, he completely ripped this disc, and as you saw, almost aced it. So that's there for a few guys, but I think for most of the field, Lewis has the right idea. So there's 2 different ways to play this hole. Either park it or lay up for the easy 3. Now, let's look at some of the ways that it has gone bad for folks. This is Chris Eads, the lefty from Arkansas, plenty of power to get over the OB. He decides to go with the low route, but look what happens. The wind gets on top, pushes it down into the OB. The problem with this is that it's going to leave a long upshot that we'll take a look at here in a second. The second problem, so to avoid staying too low and getting stuck in the OB, here's Big Germ, and he goes a little bit higher. The wind gets under his disc, lifts it up, and pushes him way off to the left. Both of these guys are going to have very awkward looking second shots. Now, it's better to be where Germ is because he doesn't have an OB stroke to go along with his. So let's go back to where Chris is going to play it. The last place he was in bounds leaves him about 200 feet looking right at the basket. Easy enough, right? However, the basket is on an elevated green, as well as the basket itself is elevated. So the problem is you think you're aiming at the bottom of the basket, but the ground starts to go up. You end up landing, say, 15, 20 feet short, and now you've got an uphill putt to an elevated basket with some wind coming off of the hill into your face. Not what you want to have. Let's go over to where Germ ended up. Now, left is better than OB, obviously. However, it leaves a very interesting little shot. You've got a couple of gaps that you're going to have to hit, and Germ goes with the kind of flick spike. A very well created shot here, very well thought out, and then he also goes and executes this. The problem with this shot is that if you don't execute it well, if you don't hit your tiny gap, you're going to fall into those bushes, leaving yourself no chance for a putt and just going to have to lay up and take your 4. So as we can see, for a pretty straightforward hole where you just want to rip, there's all sorts of trouble that you can get in, and that's what I like about this hole. The smartest thing to do for just about every player is to lay up. Throw a 400-foot hyzer, just big and wide. And this is actually what Drew Gibson does. So let's take a look at this real quick. He just goes straight hyzer the whole way, mashes it with his power. He's trying to get to the middle, and if he puts a little too much on it, he'll end up in the trees on the right, but he'll end up pretty much pin high, and he can just poke out and take his 3. So that's kind of the best way to be safe and go for it. But for my book, if I'm standing on this box, I'm going to take the Lewis Bitney route here and get the smart 3 and move on to the next hole.